What kind of woman leaves everything behind, not because she must, but because she chooses to? A young widow stood at the edge of a dusty road. Behind her lay the only home she had ever known. Ahead stretched a land she had never seen, a place where she would be a foreigner, an outsider, a stranger with no promise of welcome. She had no wealth, no husband, no certainty that tomorrow would bring bread. Yet history would remember her name for thousands of years. Her name was Ruth. The wind moved gently across the high plateau of Moab, carrying with it the dry scent of wild herbs and sun-baked earth. The hills shimmered beneath the afternoon light, while scattered flocks wandered between patches of stubborn green. Stone houses rested quietly against the slopes, their walls warmed by years of relentless sunshine. Life here was never easy. Families rose before dawn. Women ground grain with heavy stones until their hands became rough. Clay jars were carried from distant wells. Bread was baked over open fires, and every harvest depended upon rain that might never come. Ruth had known this rhythm since childhood. She had laughed beneath these skies, learned the songs of her people, and watched the changing seasons from the same hills her parents and grandparents had known. She could never have imagined that strangers from another nation would one day change the course of her life forever. Years earlier, a famine had fallen upon the land of Judah. Fields that once promised grain had become cracked and lifeless beneath an unforgiving sky. Wells grew shallow. Families watched their food disappear one handful at a time. Among those driven away by hunger was a man named Elimelech. He left Bethlehem with his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilion, seeking survival across the Jordan River in the land of Moab. For Israelites, Moab was foreign territory. The 2 peoples shared a distant ancestry through Lot, yet generations of conflict had built suspicion between them. Customs differed, worship differed. Even language carried unfamiliar sounds. Still, hunger often speaks louder than pride. The family settled among strangers. Years passed. The sons grew into men. Then they married. One of those young women was Ruth. The scriptures say simply, they lived there about 10 years. 10 years. Only 4 words describe an entire decade. Yet within those years, countless ordinary moments unfolded. Morning fires crackled while bread baked on flat stones. Children from neighboring homes chased one another between olive trees. Neighbors exchanged baskets of figs, lentils, and woven cloth. The seasons continued their endless procession. Spring rains softened the fields. Summer heat covered the valleys with shimmering air. Autumn filled storage jars with grain and pressed olives into fragrant oil. Winter winds swept through narrow streets, carrying smoke from hearths into the evening sky. Perhaps Ruth learned Naomi's language little by little. Perhaps Naomi showed her the traditions of Israel while they prepared meals together. Perhaps on quiet evenings Naomi spoke of Bethlehem, of vineyards climbing gentle hills, of shepherds watching their flocks beneath endless stars, of festivals where families gathered to remember the faithfulness of the God of Israel. Ruth listened, at first perhaps only out of kindness, but stories have a way of planting seeds inside the human heart. Naomi did not worship many gods as the people of Moab did. She spoke of one God, the creator of heaven and earth, a God who heard prayers, a God who made covenants, a God who remained faithful even when people wandered far from him. Those conversations may have lingered long after the lamps had burned low. Ruth could not know that one day those words would become the foundation beneath her own feet. Then, without warning, sorrow entered the household. Elimelech died. No explanation is given, only silence. Naomi buried her husband in foreign soil, far from the land where generations of his family had rested. Grief settled over the home like a long winter that refused to end. Still, there remained hope. Her sons were alive. They would care for their wives. Life, though changed, would continue. But tragedy had not yet finished its work. Years later, Mahlon and Kilian also died, one after another. 3 widows remained: Naomi, Orpah, Ruth. No husbands, no sons, no inheritance. In the ancient Near East, widowhood often meant far more than heartbreak. Without a husband or grown son, a woman's future could become painfully uncertain. Land usually remained within the family line, and opportunities to earn a living were few. Survival often depended on relatives or the kindness of others. The little house that once echoed with conversation became unbearably quiet. 3 women sat together beneath the fading light. No words could repair what had been lost. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the hills of Moab. Inside, 3 lives stood at a crossroads they had never expected to face. News travels slowly across mountains. Sometimes it arrives with merchants leading weary donkeys, sometimes with travelers seeking shelter before nightfall, sometimes with shepherds who have heard whispers in distant villages. One such whisper reached Naomi. The famine in Judah was over. The Lord had visited his people again, and the fields around Bethlehem were yielding grain once more. For the first time in years, a small spark of hope broke through the darkness of her grief. There was nothing left for her in Moab. No husband, no sons, no future she could imagine, only memories that had become too painful to carry. So she gathered what little remained, wrapped her belongings in worn cloth, and prepared to return to the land she had left so many years before. Ruth and Orpah walked beside her. The morning air was cool as they left the familiar hills behind. Their sandals stirred small clouds of dust along the narrow road, while larks circled high above the valleys. Every step carried them farther from the homes they had always known. For a long time, no one spoke. Grief has a language of its own, and often it is silence. Naomi glanced at the 2 young women walking faithfully beside her. They owed her nothing. Their husbands were gone. Their future did not have to be tied to the sorrow of an aging widow. Finally, she stopped. The road stretched behind them in one direction and ahead in the other. A warm breeze tugged gently at their cloaks. Naomi turned to them with eyes marked by years of tears. "Go back," she said softly. "Go back to your mothers. Go back to your families. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May he grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." She kissed them. The 3 women embraced, and the silence that had held them together broke into tears. Neither Ruth nor Orpah wished to leave. "We will go with you," they insisted.
But Naomi shook her head. "My daughters, why would you come with me?" Her voice carried no bitterness toward them, only painful honesty. She had no more sons to offer them, no inheritance, no promise that life in Bethlehem would be easier. In Judah, they would not simply be widows, they would be foreign widows, strangers, women from Moab. The relationship between Israel and Moab had long been strained. Old conflicts had left deep scars, and many Israelites looked upon Moabites with suspicion. Ruth would not only cross a border of land, she would cross a border of identity. Naomi knew this. She understood the price Ruth would pay. Again, she urged them to return. This time, Orpah wept even harder. She embraced Naomi once more. Then, with a heart divided between love and survival, she turned back toward Moab. The Bible never condemns Orpah. Her decision was understandable. She chose the familiar road, the safer road. Perhaps as she disappeared into the distance, she looked back more than once. Perhaps she wondered for years what became of the two women she had left behind. Scripture does not tell us. Its attention remains fixed upon the one who stayed, Ruth. The wind lifted a loose strand of her dark hair as she watched Orpah disappear over the hills. Naomi spoke again. "Look," she said gently, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after her." There was every reason to do so, every practical reason, every reasonable reason. But some decisions cannot be measured by reason alone. Something had changed within Ruth long before this journey began. Perhaps it had happened over years of listening to Naomi speak about the God of Israel. Perhaps it had grown quietly through shared meals, prayers, and ordinary conversations by the evening fire. Faith often grows like a seed beneath the soil, invisible, patient, until the day it finally breaks into the light. Ruth stepped closer. Her answer has echoed across centuries. "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 through 17. These were not merely words of affection, they were words of covenant. In that moment, Ruth surrendered far more than a homeland. She surrendered certainty. She left behind her language, her customs, her extended family, and every familiar landmark of her childhood. Ahead lay a country that might never fully accept her. Yet she walked toward it anyway, not because she knew what awaited her, but because she had chosen whom she would follow. Naomi looked into Ruth's face. There was no hesitation there, only quiet determination. The older woman understood that no argument would change her mind. So the conversation ended. Without another word, the two widows continued along the winding road together. One carried the weight of painful memories. The other carried hope she could not yet explain. The journey from the plains of Moab to Bethlehem was not a short walk. It led across rugged hills, steep valleys, and the Jordan region before climbing again into the hill country of Judah. Travelers often moved in small groups for safety, sleeping where they could and depending on wells or generous households along the way. Day after day, the landscape slowly changed. The dry plateaus gave way to greener valleys. Olive groves appeared along the hillsides. Fig trees spread their broad leaves beside narrow paths. In the evenings, as the western sky burned with shades of gold and crimson, the two women rested under the open heavens. Above them, countless stars filled the darkness, the same stars Abraham once had been invited to count, the same heavens under which generations had learned that God's promises often unfold far more slowly than human hearts expect. Neither Naomi nor Ruth knew that each step toward Bethlehem was also a step toward a future neither of them could yet imagine.
Bethlehem awakened with the first light of dawn. Before the sun had fully climbed above the hills of Judah, smoke curled from stone chimneys, doors creaked open, and the streets slowly filled with the sounds of daily life. Shepherds led their flocks toward fresh pasture, donkeys carried baskets of grain, children chased one another through narrow lanes until their mothers called them back to morning chores. When Naomi and Ruth entered the town, people stopped to stare. Years had passed since Naomi had left. Time and grief had changed her face. Some recognized her immediately. Others looked twice before whispering to one another. "Can this be Naomi?" they asked. The name Naomi means pleasant, yet sorrow had altered the woman they remembered. She answered quietly, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Ruth 1, chapter 20, verses 21. Those words revealed the depth of her pain, but they did not tell the whole story. Naomi believed she had returned empty, unaware that the faithful young woman standing beside her would become one of God's greatest gifts. The timing of their arrival was significant. The barley harvest had just begun. Across the hills surrounding Bethlehem, fields shimmered beneath the spring sun. Heads of barley swayed like gentle waves whenever the breeze crossed the valleys. Workers sharpened sickles before sunrise, while owners organized teams to gather the precious harvest before the weather changed. Harvest was demanding work. Men cut the grain, women bundled it into sheaves, others carried the bundles away. Dust clung to clothes, sweat ran freely, and the day often stretched from dawn until evening. Yet God's law contained a remarkable command for such days. Landowners were instructed not to harvest every corner of their fields and not to gather what was accidentally left behind. The remaining grain belonged to the poor, widows, foreigners, and those with no land of their own. As Scripture says, "You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner." Leviticus chapter 19, verses 9 through 10. It was not charity born from impulse, it was justice woven into everyday life. Ruth understood what this meant. The next morning she turned to Naomi. "Let me go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain after someone in whose sight I may find favor." Naomi nodded. There was little else they could do. No stored food, no income, only faith and the willingness to work. Ruth wrapped her cloak tightly, covered her head against the strengthening sun, and walked toward the fields beyond Bethlehem. The road wound between vineyards and olive trees before opening into broad stretches of ripening barley. Golden stalks rippled beneath the wind, their whispering sound rising and falling like waves upon the sea. Workers were already scattered across the fields. The harvest had begun. Ruth remained at the edge, careful not to disturb anyone. She waited until the reapers passed, then bent to collect the stalks they had missed. One by one, hand by hand. It was slow work. Every stalk mattered. The ground was uneven, and the spring sun climbed steadily higher.
Dust settled on her sandals and cloak. Her back began to ache from hours of bending, yet she did not complain. Around her, conversations rose and faded. Some workers noticed the unfamiliar young woman, a Moabite. Whispers traveled quietly between them. Foreigners often lived under watchful eyes, and Ruth surely felt those glances upon her. Still, she continued gathering grain, not asking for pity, only for the chance to labor with dignity. Without realizing it, she had entered the field of a man named Boaz. The Bible introduces this detail almost casually. She happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. Ruth 2, verse 3. To human eyes, it appeared to be chance, but as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that quiet providence often hides behind ordinary moments. Late that morning, a man approached from Bethlehem. His cloak reflected the prosperity of a successful landowner, yet there was nothing proud in his manner. As he greeted the harvesters, he spoke words rarely recorded of rich men in the ancient world. "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Ruth 2, verse 4. Respect flowed both ways. It revealed something about the character of the man before the story ever described him. Boaz surveyed the workers, then his attention settled upon a young woman he did not recognize. She worked steadily despite the heat. She kept to herself. She neither demanded attention nor shrank from honest labor. Turning to the overseer, he asked a simple question: "Whose young woman is this?" The foreman replied, "She is the young Moabite who returned with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission to glean behind the reapers and has worked from early morning until now, resting only briefly." Boaz looked again across the field. Ruth was still gathering the scattered stalks, unaware that someone was watching, not with suspicion, but with growing admiration. The meeting that would change both of their lives had begun, though neither of them yet understood how profoundly God's hand was already at work.